My name is Ben Colton. I'm 33, and I've spent 9 years teaching fifth grade at a public elementary school here in Louisville. 9 years of learning one thing above everything else. The quietest kid in the room is usually the one paying the closest attention. I know patience the way most people know how to tie their shoes. So when my father called and said we needed to sit down and talk about my grandfather's house, I should have asked one question before I said yes. Who else is going to be at that table? I didn't ask. I drove over, walked into my parents' dining room, and found my father, my mother, and my brother Derek already seated. A stack of paper sitting at my place at the table. My father looked up, slid the paper across to me, and said the sentence I'd spent weeks bracing for. Sign it. Sell the house to your brother for $250,000, or as far as I'm concerned, you're out of this family. He thought he already had my answer. He had no idea what I was already planning to do about it, or what his own son was going to find waiting for him at the very house he wanted so badly, just a couple of months later. Welcome to Leo Narrations, where ordinary people get pushed to their absolute limit by the ones who are supposed to love them most and find a way to walk out standing taller than when they walked in. If you've ever been the one expected to fold, to apologize, to just go along with it, this story is for you. Drop a comment and subscribe if you want more. But let me back up. Before the paper on the table, before that dinner, before my father ever picked up the phone to call me, I need to tell you who I was on the morning my grandfather died, because that's the version of me my family was still counting on. It wasn't the version I'd already become. The elementary school where I teach sits in the Highlands, about 15 minutes from the house I used to spend every weekend at growing up. My brother Derek is 36, a senior project manager at Ashford Realty Group, one of the bigger development firms in the region. And for as long as I can remember, he's been the son my parents actually talk about. Growing up, the difference was never subtle. At dinners, at holidays, in front of relatives who barely knew us, my father would ask Derek about his grades, his internships, his job offers. He'd ask me if I was still planning on the teaching thing. Not because he was curious, because he was hoping I'd change my mind. Derek's up for regional director next year, my mother told my aunt once, at a 4th of July cookout, loud enough for half the yard to hear. Then, almost as an afterthought, glancing my way, and Ben's wonderful with the kids. Wonderful with the kids, that was the ceiling of what I was allowed to be, in my family's eyes. Not smart, not ambitious, wonderful with the kids. Like I was a golden retriever they were proud of, but wouldn't brag about at a dinner party. My father wanted to go into commercial real estate himself, back before I was born. Something fell through, a partnership that never happened, maybe a loan he couldn't get either, and he ended up managing a hardware supply warehouse instead. He never said it outright, but I think watching Derek build the career he never got to have was the closest thing to redemption my father ever found, which meant Derek could do no wrong, and I was, at best, a rounding error. At school events, it was the same story in a different room. Parents would ask about Derek's job, his car, his condo downtown. Nobody asked what I was teaching that semester, or which of my students had finally learned to read a paragraph out loud without shaking. To my family, shaping a 10-year-old's whole future wasn't the kind of accomplishment worth bringing up at dinner. My grandfather was different. Walter Hargrove was my mother's father, and every Sunday afternoon growing up, I'd ride my bike over to his house on St. James Court in the old Louisville Historic District, and we'd sit on his porch while he told me stories about the war, about my grandmother Margaret, about the years he spent restoring that Victorian one room at a time. He asked me real questions. What are you reading? What are you teaching the kids this month? He wanted actual answers, and he listened to them. You've got your grandmother's patience, Ben, he told me once, watching me untangle a fishing line I'd made a mess of. People mistake that for weakness, right up until the day it isn't. I didn't understand what he meant. Not then. When Walter was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, I was 27. The doctors wouldn't give him a clean number. It could move fast, they said, or it could move slow, depending on how his body responded to treatment. Nobody could tell us which. My parents visited twice in 5 years. 40 minutes, maybe less each time. It's hard to see him like that, my mother told me once over the phone, as if her discomfort were the emergency. Derek never visited at all. He called sometimes, always distracted, always somewhere between meetings. Tell Grandpa I said hi, he texted me once. Swamped with the Preston Point deal. Can't get away this week. He never got away any week, not once in 5 years. I did. I stepped back from full-time teaching and picked up tutoring and long-term substitute work instead, so I could move into Walter's guest room and be there when he needed me. I cooked what he could still eat. I drove him to appointments. I sat with him on the bad nights when the pain kept him up past 3 in the morning, and I sat with him on the good afternoons when he wanted to talk about nothing at all. My mother called once during those years, not to check on him, but to tell me I was wasting my time. "It's not like he has much to leave anybody, Ben," she said. "You should be building your own life." I didn't say anything back. I just hung up and went to check on my grandfather. Walter died on a Tuesday morning in early spring, sunlight coming in sideways through the bedroom curtains. I was holding his hand. His last words to me were quiet, almost too quiet to catch. "I already took care of it," he whispered. "Don't let them talk you out of what's yours." I didn't know what he meant by that either. Not yet. We buried him at Cave Hill Cemetery on a gray Thursday, with maybe a dozen people standing around the grave. My parents came, Derek came, in a suit that fit better than his relationship with our grandfather ever had. 3 weeks later, we all sat in a downtown law office on West Main Street to hear the will read. Arthur Ellison, my grandfather's attorney, cleared his throat and started reading in that flat, careful voice lawyers use for documents that are about to upset somebody. To my grandson, Benjamin Richard Colton, the one who stayed when it would have been easier to leave, I leave the house at St. James Court, free and clear, along with its contents. The room went very quiet. My father's face lost color. My mother's mouth actually fell open. But it was Derek's reaction I remember most. His jaw tightened, and his hands, resting on the conference table, curled slowly into fists, like he was working very hard not to say something in front of the attorney. "There has to be a mistake," Derek finally said. "Grandpa wasn't exactly sharp near the end. Was he even competent when he signed this?" Ellison took his glasses off and cleaned them, unhurried. "I can assure you, Mr. Colton, your grandfather was fully competent. This document was witnessed, notarized, and executed to every legal standard. $780,000. That was the appraised value of the St. James Courthouse. My grandfather had left every board and beam of it to me. Before we left, Ellison handed me a sealed envelope. "Your grandfather asked me to give you this," he said. "He told me you should only open it if you needed to." I put it in my jacket pocket without opening it. Walking out of that office, I could feel Derek's eyes on my back the entire way to the elevator. The pressure started within the week. My parents showed up at the St. James Courthouse unannounced, sat down in Walter's living room like they'd been invited, and told me, more or less, that it wasn't fair for one person to keep the whole thing. "Family should share," my mother said, nodding like she'd rehearsed it. A second visit. A few days later, my father finally said the quiet part out loud. "I promised your brother I'd help him with a house before the wedding," he told me. "Krista's family has money. Derek needs to bring something to the table. This is how I keep that promise to him." Not to me, to Derek. That was the whole equation, laid out plainly for the first time. My father hadn't been able to help Derek buy a house himself, and my inheritance was the easiest way to make good on a promise he never should have made in the first place. "That's not my problem to solve, Dad," I told him. "It is now," he said. "It became your problem the day Dad left it to you instead of splitting it fair." 2 weeks after the will was read, my father called what he referred to as a family dinner. This was the one I already told you about. It was just the 4 of us. Him, my mother, Derek, and me, at his house. On a Thursday night I now think of as the night everything actually started, even though the story doesn't end there. He'd already printed the paperwork. He slid it across the table before I'd even finished my first bite. "Sign it, Ben," he said. "Sell the house to your brother for $250,000, or as far as I'm concerned, you're out of this family." Derek didn't look up from his phone. He just grinned. "The market value is $780," I said. "Market value doesn't mean anything between family," my mother said. "That's a family price. That's how this works." "It's 1/3 of what it's worth," I said. Derek finally set his phone down. "Ben, I work in this industry. Trust me, $250 is generous for a fixer-upper with a dead man's furniture still in it." "I was there for 5 years," I said. "You weren't there once." "I had a career to build," Derek said without a flicker of shame. "Some of us have real responsibilities." My father leaned forward. "This is a family decision." "It's my house," I said. "It was Grandpa's house," my mother said. "You just happened to be standing in it when he died." I stood up from the table. I didn't sign anything. I didn't yell either. I just told them I needed time to think, and I left before dessert, my father's voice trailing after me down the driveway, telling me I had 1 week to come to my senses. That night, at 11:15, my phone rang. Derek's name lit up the screen. I almost didn't answer. I'm glad I did. Did I wake you? He asked. His voice was different than it had been at dinner. Colder, more careful. What do you want, Derek? I want you to understand something, he said. This little stand you're making, it's cute, but you should know who you're dealing with. I think I already know. He laughed, short and dry. I'm not just your brother, Ben. I sit across the table from city officials and school board members every quarter on zoning approvals. People who owe me favors. You teach at a public school. Budget season is brutal this year. It wouldn't take much for someone to start asking questions about a certain fifth grade teacher's performance reviews. Is that a threat? It's just how the real world works, Derek said. They don't teach that in your classroom. He hung up before I could answer. I sat there in the dark for a long time, the phone still warm in my hand, my grandfather's face looking back at me from a photo on the nightstand. The next morning, I finally opened the envelope Ellison had given me. Inside was a letter in my grandfather's handwriting and a business card. Ben, if you're reading this, someone is trying to take what I gave you, and I'm sorry to say I saw it coming. Your father made promises to your brother he never should have made, and I knew he'd try to collect on them using my house. If you want to keep it and protect yourself at the same time, call the number on this card. Linda Pierce was my attorney years before Ellison. She handles the kind of real estate problems most lawyers have never even heard of. Remember what I told you. The tightest grip isn't always the one that holds on the hardest. All my love, Grandpa. I called Linda Pierce that morning. Ben Colton, she said when I introduced myself. Walter told me you might call someday. I'm glad you did. I told her everything. The will, the pressure, the threat call from Derek the night before. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Have you ever heard of a sale-leaseback agreement? She asked. I hadn't. It's simpler than it sounds. You sell the house at full market value, but as part of the deal, you negotiate a long-term lease that lets you keep living there. The buyer gets a solid investment property. You get the money, and you never have to leave. Who buys a house the seller's still living in? You'd be surprised, she said. Then after a pause, Ben, where exactly is this house? St. James Court, Old Louisville. She went quiet again, longer this time. Are you sitting down? Why? Because I had a meeting last week with a development firm that's actively looking for a property in that exact district. Historic building, high-end conversion, the whole package. My stomach dropped before she even said the name. Ashford Realty Group, she said. Their CEO wants a satellite office somewhere in the historic district. Your grandfather's house would be close to perfect. That's my brother's company. I know, Linda said. Small world, apparently. I want to pause here for a second. If you've ever had someone in your own family use their job, their money, or their connections to threaten you into giving something up, drop the word boundary in the comments. I want to know. I'm not the only one who's been there. And if you're curious what happens when my brother's own CEO walks into that house, stick with me, because that part's coming. 2 weeks after the dinner where my father slid that paper across the table, my parents hosted a second dinner. This one was bigger. Uncle Gary and Aunt Denise came, along with a handful of cousins, the whole extended crowd, all gathered at my parents' house on a Sunday evening with my grandmother's old china set out on the table, which felt like an odd choice given the subject at hand. Halfway through the meal, my father stood and tapped his glass with a fork. I want to say something, he announced, that affects this whole family. The table quieted. As most of you know, my father-in-law left his house to Ben. What you might not know is that Ben has refused to share it with his brother. He let it sit in the air. He's chosen a building over his own family. Murmurs went around the table. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue she'd clearly brought for exactly this moment. He's changed since Dad passed, she said. I barely recognize my own son. Uncle Gary shook his head at me. Ben, you've got to think about family here. Derek's got a wedding coming. He's got plans. He has real responsibilities, Aunt Denise added, nodding along. Derek stood up from his chair, smoothing his jacket, and walked around the table until he was standing right behind me. Let me explain something to everybody here, he said, loud enough for the whole table. My brother teaches 10-year-olds to color inside the lines. He wiped a sick old man's chin for 5 years and thinks that makes him some kind of financial expert. Scattered laughter from a cousin or two. It's not exactly rocket science, Ben. I was there for 5 years, I said quietly. You weren't there once. Anybody could have done what you did, Derek said, shrugging. Changed some sheets, made some soup. I looked around that table at people who'd known me my entire life, now looking at me like I was the villain in a story where I'd done nothing but stay. I stood up, no speech, no raised voice. Just the simple act of standing while 11 people stared at me in silence. Thank you, I said, for showing me exactly where I stand in this family. Ben, sit down, my father said. No, I said and walked out. I've never heard anybody in that family say no before. Not once. Not to my father. The word just hung there behind me as I walked out the front door into the cool night air. I sat in my car for a full minute before I could make my hands stop shaking. Then I called Linda. It's Ben, I said. Set up the meeting. Tell Gordon Ashford I'm ready to talk terms. You sure? I've never been more sure of anything. 2 weeks later, Gordon Ashford walked through the front door of my grandfather's house. He wasn't what I expected. Tall, gray at the temples, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car, but his handshake was solid and his eyes went straight to the crown molding above the entryway before they went to me. Mr. Colton, he said, this is quite a property. Victorian bones, original woodwork, a location most developers would kill for. I can see why your grandfather held on to it. He held on to it for 40 years, I said. I spent the last 5 of them here with him. Ashford nodded slowly. That kind of loyalty is rare. I respect it. We walked through the house together. The front parlor, the library with its floor-to-ceiling shelves, the kitchen where I'd learned to make my grandfather's pot roast. Ashford asked good questions, careful ones, the kind you only ask about something you actually plan to buy. He wasn't performing interest. He had it for real. When we sat down, Linda laid out the proposal. Full market value, $780,000, with a 15-year renewable lease that let me keep the upstairs as my private residence while the ground floor became office space. There's something you should know before we go any further, I said. My brother works for you, Derek Colton, senior project manager. Ashford didn't blink. Does he? I wanted you to hear it from me before you found out some other way. He was quiet for a moment, studying me the way you'd study a contract clause you wanted to get exactly right. I appreciate you telling me directly, Mr. Colton. I don't make business decisions based on my employees' family situations. I make them based on value. He gestured at the room around us. This house has value. Your proposal has value. What happens between you and your brother isn't my concern as long as it doesn't affect the deal in front of me. Something in my chest finally loosened. We signed 2 weeks later, right there at the dining room table where my grandfather used to eat breakfast every morning of his life. My hand shook a little on the pen, not from fear, just from the sheer size of what was actually happening. $780,000, minus closing costs, would land in my account within days, and I would still wake up every morning in the house my grandfather had left me. One more thing, Ashford said, sliding the signed papers back into a folder. The satellite office opens next month. Derek will be one of the project managers rotating through it. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The invitation landed on Derek's desk about 4 weeks later, a company-wide launch event for Ashford Realty's newest satellite office, attendance expected of every senior project manager. The address was St. James Court. My address. On the night of the launch, I stood at the front window and watched catering vans pull up along the curb. String lights went up in the old oak trees out front. Everything my grandfather had built quietly for 40 years was about to become a party for people who'd never met him. It was a Friday. I remember that clearly because of what happened after. Cars started arriving around 6:30. Executives in good suits, junior staff clutching champagne glasses, a couple of board members admiring the trim work on the porch. Then a silver sedan pulled up to the curb and Derek stepped out, checking his phone, adjusting his jacket, not looking at the house yet. Then he looked up. I will remember his face for the rest of my life. His whole expression ran through it in about 3 seconds flat. Confusion, then disbelief, then something that looked a lot like dread. While his colleagues streamed past him up the front walk, greeting each other, complimenting the venue. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. Evening, Derek, I called out. Welcome to the new office. He didn't move. A young associate touched his arm. Mr. Colton, you okay? This is, Derek swallowed. This is my brother's house. The associate looked between us, clearly lost. I thought Mr. Ashford bought this from somebody named Ben Colton. He did, I said, walking down the porch steps. I'm Ben, and this is still my home. The formal program started at 7 in what used to be my grandfather's living room, now packed wall to wall with Ashford Realty staff. Gordon Ashford took his place near the fireplace. Thank you all for coming tonight, he began. This satellite office is an important step for our firm, expanding into a new market while honoring the character of a building that stood in this neighborhood for over a century. He paused, scanning the room. I want to specifically recognize the man who made this possible. Mr. Ben Colton, who sold us this property and who will continue to reside on the upper floors under a long-term lease. His professionalism throughout this process was frankly exceptional. Applause moved through the room. I nodded, aware of Derek somewhere near the back, his knuckles white around a glass he wasn't drinking from. His grandfather maintained this home beautifully for over 4 decades, Ashford continued, and I'm glad we found a way to honor that legacy while meeting our company's needs. More applause. A few executives came over afterward to shake my hand, to compliment the house, to say how clever the lease structure was. And through all of it, Derek stood frozen near the back of the room, saying nothing. Around 8, I checked my phone for the first time all night. 17 missed calls, all from Derek. The texts underneath them got shorter and angrier as they went. Answer your phone. Did you know about this? Call me back right now. Ben. What did you do? My parents' car screeched into the driveway less than an hour after the last guests left. My father was out before the engine fully stopped. What did you do? He shouted, storming up the walk. You sold Dad's house to strangers. I sold it at fair market value, I said, and negotiated a lease that lets me keep living here. Something none of you were willing to offer me. That was supposed to stay in the family. It did stay in the family, Dad. With me. My mother appeared behind him, mascara already starting to run. How could you humiliate your brother in front of his entire company? I didn't humiliate anybody. I made a business decision. A business decision? My father laughed, sharp and bitter. You're a school teacher. What do you know about business? The words that might have cut me a year earlier just bounced off now. I know enough to get full value for a house you wanted me to sell for 1/3 of what it's worth. I know enough to protect what Grandpa left me. And your brother? You didn't think about what this does to his career? Derek threatened my career first, I said. He told me he had connections at my school district and could make life difficult for me if I didn't sign that paper. I just made sure I had options. My parents looked at each other. Neither one spoke. I love this family, I said, but love doesn't mean handing over what doesn't belong to anyone else. My father opened his mouth. Then for the first time I could remember, he closed it without saying anything at all. Word travels fast in an office building. Within a week, everyone at Ashford Realty knew the story. The ambitious project manager who'd tried to pressure his own brother out of an inherited house, and the brother who'd quietly sold that same house to their mutual employer instead. Nobody had to explain the punchline. Derek, reporting twice a week to the exact address he'd once demanded be handed over to him, did that on its own. Every Tuesday and Friday, Derek's car pulled into the driveway around 8:45 in the morning. I made a point of being visible, watering the garden, collecting the mail, drinking coffee on the porch while he walked past toward the converted office space on the ground floor. We never spoke. We didn't need to. His co-workers noticed everything. The conversations that quieted when he walked by, the glances they exchanged behind his back. Wait, that's actually his brother's house? I overheard a junior associate ask once. It's company property, Derek said, clipped. Still weird, though, the associate muttered, not quite under his breath. I think the professional embarrassment wasn't even the worst part for Derek. The worst part was losing control of a story he'd always assumed he'd win. Derek had spent his whole adult life making sure things went his way. The job, the promotions, and now a fiancé whose family actually had money. He wasn't used to losing quietly in front of people who respected him. Twice a week, that's exactly what he did. My parents stopped calling for 3 months. No demands, no guilt trips, no surprise visits. The silence felt strange after so many years of constant noise, but I didn't reach out either. They needed room to sit with what had happened. And honestly, so did I. Then, on a Sunday morning in the fall, my phone rang. Ben? My mother's voice sounded smaller than I remembered it. Hi, Mom. A long pause. I wanted to check on you. Are you doing okay? It wasn't an apology. I hadn't expected one, but it was something. I'm good, Mom. I'm doing well, actually. I drove by the house last week, she said. The garden looks just like it did when your grandfather kept it. I try to keep it the way he would have wanted. Another pause, quieter this time. He would have been proud of you, Ben. For standing your ground like that, he would have loved that. I felt my throat tighten. Thanks, Mom. Maybe we could get lunch sometime, just the two of us. I'd like that, I said, and I meant it. Nothing was fixed after that call. Nothing was fully forgiven. But something had shifted, even if just slightly. The relationship wasn't over. It was just running on different terms now. My terms. Derek showed up at my private entrance about 9 months after the launch event. I was grading spelling tests at the kitchen table when I heard 3 sharp knocks, then silence. I opened the door. He was still in his work clothes, his professional mask mostly in place, though his eyes gave away something else. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside without a word. He sat down at the same kitchen table where we'd fought over the last slice of birthday cake as kids, where our whole shared history was basically carved into the floorboards. "I thought maybe we could talk," he said. "Like brothers?" "Okay. I never thought you'd actually do something like this. All those years I figured—" He stopped. "You figured I'd always fold." "Yeah," he said. "I did. Why are you here, Derek?" He shifted in his seat. "I want us to have an actual relationship again. Move past all of it. Can we? I'd like to try." A pause. "Also, since you and Ashford get along now, any chance you could talk to him about changing my rotation? Coming here twice a week is rough." And there it was. Not reconciliation, negotiation. "Being brothers isn't a contract, Derek," I said. "Respect is. That's what got us here in the first place." He didn't have anything to say to that. He left without an answer, though I thought I saw something new in his face on the way out. Maybe understanding. Maybe just disappointment that the leverage hadn't worked. Now I want to ask you something. If you'd been in my position, what would you have done? Comment A if you'd have tried to fully rebuild the relationship no matter what. Comment B if you'd have kept your distance the way I did. And if you want more stories like this one, go ahead and hit subscribe. We're almost at the end. A year has passed since that Friday night the launch event turned my grandfather's living room into a boardroom. I still teach 5th grade. I still grade papers at the same kitchen table my grandfather ate breakfast at for 40 years. I still wake up every morning in the house he left me, and everything about that feels different now than it used to. The ground floor hums with office noise during business hours, phones ringing, printers going, meetings happening in the room where my grandfather used to watch the evening news. Then 5 o'clock comes, and the quiet comes back. My quiet, my peace. His rocking chair still sits by the upstairs window, exactly where he left it. His tool bench is still in the back room, half his tools still hanging on their hooks. Some mornings, in that early quiet before the office downstairs opens up, I swear I can still feel him in this house. Not a ghost, just something that soaked into the walls over 40 years and never quite left. $780,000 sits in an investment account now. Security I never thought I'd have. But the money was never really the win. The win is walking through my own front door without flinching. The win is knowing nobody can talk me out of what's actually mine. My grandfather knew that a long time before I did. "You've got your grandmother's patience," he told me once. "People mistake that for weakness, right up until the day it isn't." I understand what he meant now. Patience isn't about staying quiet forever. It's about knowing exactly what you're worth, clearly enough that nobody can talk you into selling it short. People ask sometimes if I regret it, if I wish things had gone differently with my family. My answer's pretty short. I didn't cut anyone off. I didn't burn any bridges on purpose. I just changed the terms of the relationship. For the first time in 33 years, those terms actually favor me. My mother and I get lunch once a month now. She's never said the word sorry, not directly, but she asks about my students and actually remembers their names. My father keeps more distance. I think his pride is still bruised, and maybe it always will be, but he nods when he sees me now. And once, at Thanksgiving, he told me the garden looked exactly the way his father-in-law used to keep it. Derek and I exist in a careful, uneasy truce. We're not close. We may never be close again. But when he walks past my porch on his way into the office, he waves sometimes, and I wave back. Is that forgiveness? I honestly don't know. Maybe it's something in between, something that doesn't have a clean name. What I do know is this. Getting even was never really the point, and staying angry wasn't either. I just wanted to hold on to what was mine, calmly enough that nobody could talk me out of it. My grandfather understood that a lot better than I did at the time. He's the one who left me Linda's number and the nerve to actually use it. He also left me the patience to do this right instead of fast, which turned out to matter more than I expected. The strongest boundary I ever built in my life wasn't a wall, it was a signature. If you take one thing from my story, take this. You are allowed to protect what's actually yours. And sometimes the quietest signature in the room speaks a lot louder than every argument at the table combined. Thanks for staying with me through all of this. If you saw a piece of yourself in this story, whether you related more to me or, honestly, even to Derek, remember it's never too late to set an actual boundary. Drop your thoughts in the comments, tell me what you would have done in my shoes, and if you want more stories like this one, that's exactly what Leo Narrations is here for. See you in the next one.